I'm Bruce Cook. I'm here at Te Kowhai Airfield, which is just north of Hamilton on the North Island of New Zealand. Behind me here is DC-3 ZK-AZL, Alpha Zulu Lima. This is a particularly interesting aeroplane in that it's the very first of 13 AGDACs that were used in New Zealand service for top dressing. Now, for those of you who are overseas, you might not know the story about top dressing and may not know what's involved with it. So yeah, let's have a look at AZL and see where it fits into the story of top dressing in New Zealand. Alpha Zulu Lima was built in Oklahoma City in 1944 as a Douglas C-47B Dakota. It was assigned initially to the United States Army Air Force, but was transferred under Lend-Lease to the Royal New Zealand Air Force as NZ-3445. It served in the Pacific throughout the Second World War, and also served based out of Singapore during the Malayan emergency in the early 1950s. It returned to New Zealand in 1953 and had a brief service with the New Zealand National Airways Corporation. However, it returned to RNZAF service towards the end of 1953 to act as a support aircraft for the 1953 tour of New Zealand by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. After that service, it was taken on board by Aussie James of James Aviation Limited here in Hamilton, and it became the very first of the top dressing DC-3s.
Top dressing is a particularly New Zealand term, and it is similar to crop dusting as seen in North America, but it relates to the application of fertiliser and minerals onto the pasture land rather than application of pesticide dusts onto crops. New Zealand has vast areas of very hilly farmland cleared from ancient forests that once covered the country. Unfortunately, it is deficient in many minerals needed for pastoral farming, and by the 1940s soil fertility was low and erosion was becoming a serious issue. The technique of aerial top dressing, the application of mineral fertiliser from the air, was experimented with by the New Zealand Public Works Department during World War II, and further progressed by a series of experiments using RNZAF Avenger bombers in the 1940s. The whole industry developed from this, initially using surplus Tiger Moths, but moving on to more suitable aircraft such as the Cessna 180 and the de Havilland Beaver. Aircraft would operate directly off small primitive airstrips on the farms, and they dropped hundreds of loads of fertiliser in a single day before moving on to another airstrip the following day. The effect on the fertility of New Zealand's farming was immediate, as land quality and productivity improved significantly. Aussie James was an early top dressing operator based out of Hamilton, who rapidly grew his company to one of the largest in New Zealand, at one stage operating 73 aircraft of varying types. Teaming with fellow operator Guy Robinson, he began importing from the United States the very first aircraft specifically designed for New Zealand top dressing operations, the Fletcher Fu-24. The Fletchers were eventually manufactured here in New Zealand, and a descendant, the PAC 750 X-Style, is still manufactured at Hamilton today. Aussie was concerned about the difficulties of top dressing very remote hill and swamp country, so he developed the concept of using larger aircraft from bigger airstrips further away from the application site. The longer turnaround time would be compensated for by carrying a significantly larger load. He purchased ZK-AZL and converted it to carry a hopper capable of carrying 5 tons of superphosphate or lime fertiliser. After testing, AZL was given the name Highland Duster and went to serve for many years thereafter. Eventually, 3 companies in New Zealand operated a total of 13 agricultural DC-3s, which were generally known as AGDACs. Rival company Field Air Limited also operated a number of the slightly smaller Lockheed Lodestar, which had a 3-ton capacity hopper. So let's have a look at an AGDAC and its various special features.
Inside the aircraft, a 5-ton capacity hopper was installed over the wing centre section. This entirely blocked the centre of the fuselage. In this case, in AZL, the front and rear walls of the hopper have been removed for access, but we can see how big the hopper was, and the opening in the roof where it was loaded, and in the floor the openings that go down to the hopper boxes underneath, which discharge the fertiliser out into the airstream. With the hopper blocking the entire width of the cabin, the only way to the cockpit was through the small emergency access door forward of the wing root. From there it was simply up to the cockpit. The cockpit itself was modified in the mid-1950s to allow single pilot operation. A number of key controls were relocated, including the flap handle, undercarriage levers and propeller feathering controls. At the moment, AZL's cockpit is pretty bare. We would like to get this one restored to a presentable display standard. The area in behind the hopper on some aircraft was used to carry small motor cars to allow the crew to be able to drive to and from the airfield when they're working away from home base. Commonly used types were the Fiat 500 Bambina or the British Leyland Mini. They were sort of driven up small ramps through the double loading doors and could easily fit inside the space available behind the hopper. Just underneath the belly of the aircraft we've got these two hopper box doors which have doors which open and let the superphosphate flow from the hopper above out into the airflow. They're sort of partly streamlined there. The biggest problem of course is that dust then flows down the rear fuselage. In service the DC-3s had a special plastic paint applied on the rear fuselage to stop it being abraded by the granular fertiliser as it came out, but over the years the dust and everything still gets inside it. Sadly, AZL isn't in the best of condition. It's years of service with superphosphate, which when it gets moist it breaks down into acidic substances. That has caused a lot of corrosion problems on it, and the fact that it's lived outside for almost all its life, the last 50 years it has been. It has a lot of corrosion issues on board. We're never going to be able to see this thing at a full pristine museum quality restoration, and that's not going to be the intention. The key thing is that we need to keep it intact and to keep it as presentable, at least for the general public, and safe. So while we've got a lot of work to do cosmetically, we've got to wash it again. It's constantly going to turn green out here in our moist environment, and we've got to constantly keep on top of the corrosion issues. The biggest issue, however, is that we have a major structural repair that we have to do to the rear fuselage, where the corrosion has really been eating into it. Okay, this is the extreme tail cone area right in behind the toilet compartment at the back of the cabin. The big pole that you see through the middle is actually the tail wheel pivot point. It goes down to that sort of dome-shaped fairing underneath. The big problem that we have in this area, and this is where our biggest concern over this aircraft lies, is the fact that this is the low point of the aircraft. All the superphosphate dust, fertiliser dust over the years has accumulated here along with all the water. It's formed a strongly acidic liquid which has actually corroded a lot of the structure away. At the moment the bottom skins are heavily corroded, but what's more worrying is the fact that we've got at least 2.5 to 3 complete ring frames there that have gone completely, not a thing left. Okay, so our plan is at the moment is that we have to replace these, so whether we replicate them, build them locally, or whether we find surplus ring frames that we can use to splice into the existing ones halfway up the fuselage sides. What we have to do is replace a lot of the stringers and a lot of the and all the bottom skins have to go. The problem is that this is the stressed area on the aircraft as it's sitting with its tail down. We currently don't have real engines on the aircraft, they're only replicas. There's no weight to them at all, so there's a lot more weight on the tail section than there would have been otherwise. And therefore all these bottom skin panels, they're under tension with all the weight of the aircraft on them. If we leave them too long, all of this area could have structural failure and the aircraft could end up breaking its back. So this is why this is going to be our priority as we come into the summer of 2020 and 2021, which is probably around about November we'll be starting work on that here in New Zealand. As you see, there's a lot of work involved here. There's very little that's salvageable, so we'll be putting new stringers in and as hopefully replacing the missing frames. This is where we need a bit of help from overseas, because virtually all the New Zealand DC-3 hulks that are around have got similar problems in the same area. So if you happen to know of a DC-3 part which has got serviceable ring frames, that we can possibly salvage, please let us know. So this is where we're going to be doing most of our work in the future. So there's a group of us here at Te Kowhai who are working on keeping this aircraft to a presentable standard. It's, as I say, it's never going to be a museum grade example, but we need to be able to have it here because it tells the story of agricultural aviation here in New Zealand. It tells a story about the incredible things that a DC-3 is capable of doing, and it tells a story about some really interesting, colourful characters in New Zealand's aviation history, the likes of Aussie James. We really hope that we'll be able to keep this aeroplane in a condition that is presentable, and we really want to encourage everybody to come to New Zealand, visit this aircraft when you can. Obviously at the moment the world is an interesting place, but come to New Zealand when you can, and drop by and see this aircraft, and yeah, if you're able to give us a hand, let us know.